And I want to congratulate this team and the teacher for all your hard work and getting to the national finals. And my name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank that does research around K-12 education. And I'd encourage the other judges to introduce themselves too.
My name is Darcy Kern. I am a professor of history at Southern Connecticut State University, and I am also an alumna of the program. I'm very excited to see you guys. It's a great program, and I hope you have enjoyed it and enjoy your experience today.
Tim, you are muted.
Sorry about that. My name is Tim Isaacs. I'm Executive Director at the Center for Teaching the Rule of Law at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. And excuse me, I want to welcome you to the finals. You should be very proud of your work and very proud of your teacher for helping get you here.
Maybe the students could introduce themselves and their teacher.
Sure. I guess I'll start with Mr. Paulson. This is the wonderful Mr. Paulson who's helped us all year prepare for this competition, and we love him very much. My name is Coven Haldo, and I'm a junior at Windsor Plainsboro High School North in New Jersey. And I'll popcorn it over to John.
My name is Jonathan Solomon. I'm a senior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North. I'll popcorn this over to Matt.
Sure, my name is Matt Poncello. I'm a junior at WWP North, and I'll pass it over to Brian.
My name is Brian Tsai, and I am a senior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North.
Great, thank you. So before I read the question, I just want to encourage you to relax and use this as an opportunity to share with us what it is that you know. With that, I'll read the unit 1, and we'll be addressing question 1. So unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? And this is question 1, quote, the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution, end quote. To what extent, if any, did the revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Timer?
Sure. Law professor and scholar Akil Amar once called the ratification of the Constitution the most democratic deed, which not have been remotely possible without the addition of numerous revolutionary principles that played an extremely large role in influencing the law of the land, specifically the concepts of the inherent rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, popular sovereignty, federalism, separation of powers, and America's revolutionary principles of checks and balances altogether created the roots of our governing document. For example, the inherent rights are included as the base for our Constitution's Bill of Rights. Furthermore, many key ideas of the Constitution would not have made their way into modern America without the help of the Articles of Confederation. The evolution of a democratic system of government from being ruled by a monarch is evident through America's system of checks and balances that prevent any branch or individual in government from having the ability to abuse their power. Moreover, the Articles of Confederation formed a confederacy of states in their respective constitutions, following the revolutionary principle of a government with more representation from the people. After this failed, the Federalist government was created through the passing of the Constitution, which applied the concept of living government on both the national and state scales. Finally, the creation of a separation of powers also protected against tyranny or abuse of power.
Even if a government is evenly empowered, it can't operate with a citizen's permission or the principle of consent, stating that a government's philosophical right to use power is derived from the people who reside on the governed land. Through this principle, it's implied that when citizens elect a representative, they consent to be represented by that representative and their ideas. While this philosophy was first established to protect American society from an abuse of power, it soon grew to become a solution to problems in periods where legislative actions were needed. One instance was the discourse over slavery as a federal or state concern, during which nationwide popular sovereignty became the solution in determining if 2B states would permit slavery. This was problematic when manifest destiny was also emerging. Popular sovereignty considered the opinions of neither slaves nor former inhabitants, purely accounting for the ideas of new inhabitants moving westward. If old inhabitants didn't consent, is it fair to call America the land ruled by the people? This discontinuity spread into legislation as well, with a gray area around who is responsible for obtaining consent. Is it the simple majority? And if it is, wouldn't this result in Tocqueville's theory of the tyranny of majority, in which the majority excludes the needs of the minority?
The question of the extent of the consent has always been an issue dating back to the beginning of America and the Articles of Confederation, where the consent of all 13 colonies were needed to amend. However, this constitution was replaced with or without the consent of all 13, for better or for worse. Another point to consider is whether consent can be withdrawn. In actuality, there's no fine line within the current constitution, and there never really was throughout American history that answers this question. Americans are additionally faced with how our country has evolved or possibly regressed. Our group argues that modern America has strayed away from our revolutionary principles to a noticeable extent. America began with a limited government which was formed as the colonies were shaking the grasp of the British Crown. Since 1789, the government has taken a larger role in society, including expansive economic regulation, a larger military, and welfare programs. A related idea is the separation of powers, which tipped in favor of the executive branch during the past century, evidenced by the increase in executive orders, especially during the progressive FDR era.
In addition, the public emphasized the federal government as it gained power, supported by the greater voter turnout for federal elections over local ones. Lastly, modern America has slightly distanced itself from its founding principle of liberty, in the sense that Americans are increasingly willing to cede their privacy and information to the government and large tech companies. This recently began with the Patriot Act and social media companies' use of our data, conveying a willingness of Americans to give up their civil liberties in a way they previously would not have. However, just because America has shifted from its revolutionary principles in some ways, that does not mean it's always been for the worse. For example, the expansion of our formerly limited government led to crucial programs such as Medicaid and Social Security. While much of the issues we mentioned are controversial, our group agrees that a changing democracy is a sign of a healthy one. Former Fifth Circuit Judge Charles W. Pickering once said that a healthy democracy requires that we are honorable, generous, tolerant, and respectful. With equal respect for revolutionary principles and contemporary values, America can become a country even better than what the founders intended.
Great, thank you so much. So my fellow judges and I will have some follow-up questions, and I'll begin that. Following the Declaration of Independence in 1776, several states crafted state constitutions. Why did states do this, and what does it reveal about American constitutionalism?
Okay, so I guess I can start this one off. I feel like the states really decided to form their own constitutions because the federal constitution wasn't elaborate enough on what the state powers included. And also it's important to note that when we first separated from Britain, Britain was monarchy. So people were extremely, extremely afraid of the federal government having too much power. So the state government took their own liberty in forming their own constitutions. And I feel like this balance of federalism is what kind of keeps America afloat in terms of a balance of powers and a separation of powers as well. And okay, I'll popcorn it off to someone.
Yeah, I mean, I want to build off of this and say that, I think that this system of federalism is also a way to avoid that problem of the tyranny of consent that we mentioned, Tocqueville's theory, because, when you have, these state constitutions to kind of balance out the power of the federal government, you don't have a federal government that is like extremely powerful and can, kind of lord its power over all these other states, right? Because these states have their own desires, their own interests, they have their own populace that, basically has their own political opinions, right? So like by, having a state constitution or having a series of state constitutions to balance out, the federal government, we have a balance of power that avoids tyranny of the majority in that sense.
I agree, and I think that also really ties into the initial struggle between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and having individual state governments really make sure that we don't regress into a monarchy, which Britain pretty much was by the time that America had seceded from, or the colonies had seceded. So the creation of these individual state constitutions really protects our democracy.
I have a question about consent. Given all that's gone on in the last several years, do you think that consent is possible in a society that has grown as large, diverse, divisive, and pluralistic as America has become?
Well, I, for one, not sure. I'm not sure about my teammates, but I do believe that consent is possible, even in a nation so diverse, because I personally believe that consent is not simple majority. It's not just 51% of the votes, it is much more than that. It's a philosophical idea that encompasses people just being able to agree to it while not necessarily agreeing to it, stand by an idea without necessarily supporting it. So in a nation so diverse, I feel like it's not possible to get maybe 51% of the votes, but it is possible to have consent, because that's kind of a preferential philosophical idea in which you can just say, yes, I can support this, even though I'm not completely getting behind it.
Okay, thank you.
I want to agree and say that I do think that it is possible. I think that it's a matter of kind of national culture, right? Because right now we have a national culture that's very divisive, right? Like you're either on one side or the other, and you're basically like your opinions can only be in one of those like two boxes, right? But basically, like if we were to build a culture that where we trust each other again, right? Like something that we pretty much had decades before, right? Like where we were willing to kind of talk to each other and have these like open dialogues, then I think that we could build a society, where consent is possible, given all of our ideological diversity.
And I think really building off of Jonathan's point, the rise of social media and the internet has, it's kind of like created a multifaceted issue in the fact that with the rise of the internet and rise of social media, we can become more informed about the workings of our government and thus better able to give consent, but also with the spread of false news or fake news, it can create some, it can create the illusion that we are informed while really we are not informed.
I have to kind of sort of disagree. I feel like we can have consent, but it's not complete and total consent. Like we consent to one part, but then there's always this small little caveat that's added on, like, oh, you may consent to this, but here's another thing that if we told you up front, you wouldn't consent to.
Just to sum up what our group was saying, most of us believe that consent is possible in a nation so diverse, but also going back to Brian's point, it is possible that consent itself is just a multidimensional issue in which we just really need to understand a lot of factors to understand completely.
I'd actually like to continue this topic. And Jonathan, you mentioned about building trust between people. And you mentioned in your speech, you mentioned values such as honor and integrity. And Rush mentions that in his speech as well. He talks about the morals and the manners of the people. So there seems to be something about having some sort of base system of values or manners. But I'm curious, how do we build trust again so that we can have a dialogue where, Brian, like you say, not everyone may get what they want as far as consent goes, but that we are having a more serious dialogue or a better dialogue?
Sure, I can begin here. I think a major issue which has resulted in the lack of trust is the inability to compromise in modern America, where this partisanship, neither side wishes to compromise with the other, and they can't concede any of their opinions. So I think if we as a nation become better at compromising and accepting that, we may have certain political views and we might have views that we really want to pass, but we're not going to be able to get all those views because when we live in a nation so diverse, there's obviously going to be differing opinions. But if we're able to compromise, then we can really start to regain that trust.
Just to add on to what Matt said, I believe that part of compromising is also including more than one body of people in terms of like who has a seat at the table. So I think we need to start giving youth more opportunities to get engaged and express their opinions, because after all, they are the adults of tomorrow. We need to bridge that generational divide as well, because it isn't just partisanship here, it's generational divide, it is the gender gap, it is between sexualities. It's like this misunderstanding that's just present in modern America that we have yet to address.
I want to add on and say that I think that building a national movement of that trust again it does require, kind of a cultural movement from the bottom up, right? Like we need, an American populace that's kind of willing to like talk to each other again, and that rejects all the polarization that we see, nowadays because of social media and because of the internet. And once we can have that, that will reflect in our politicians, which will reflect in our lawmaking.
Great job, everybody. The hearing is now over. Congratulations to all.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to congratulate and thank you and your teacher and your parents for all your hard work. This is difficult material. It's difficult to lead off the day, and you should be very pleased with it. Your performance, I thought in your introductory remarks, you hit a lot of the kind of important touchstones. You really did a good job of articulating some of the revolutionary principles at the beginning. You talked about the Articles of Confederation a bit, and also, made a very clear statement about the ways in which we've kind of deviated from founding principles, particularly on liberty. And you gave some examples of that, the executive orders and the data, for example. I thought that you answered my question well about the state constitutions. I would just say one thing on that is that part of it was a practical matter, is that once they had broken away from Great Britain, the colonial charters no longer applied. So they needed to have the state constitutions established as really, because at that point they didn't really have any sort of formal constitutional structure because they just rebelled against Great Britain. But I liked the way in which you talked about that, particularly it's noteworthy that people like Jefferson and Adams, even when they're president, they used to refer to Virginia and Massachusetts as their country. So it gives you a really clear sense of how grounded even these folks were in their states and localities. And just finally, I thought that the conversation around that you opened up around culture was excellent. And if there's anything that the founding year sort of reflects is the quality of the culture and learning that created these founders. That's enormous. And I thought the discussion around trust and some of the issues around compromise were really good. So thank you again for your work.
One of the things that impressed me is that there seemed to be a theme that tied everything you said in response to the question together. I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but it's a theme that I think is very important. It's the theme of tension. Whether it was the tension between states and the federal government, the Articles of Confederation, and this new constitution that was trying to be framed. Later on, you talked about the regulatory state and the welfare state. There is a tension there that goes a lot deeper than you had time to discuss. There was also the tension that came up when you started talking about social media, because you addressed how important social media was. And then one of you said, yeah, but let's look at the other side of social media, because social media can also deceive us. And so that theme, I think, is really important in considering the question as a whole, because from the very beginning, revolution is all about tension. It's about those who want one thing and those who are trying to protect another thing. But the evolving of the American experiment is also about tension, and tension at all levels, and a tension that still hasn't been resolved today. So intended or not, I was really impressed with that very subtle sense of conflict that underlied your presentation. Thank you.
I thought you guys were excellent. I mean, this was really, really good. You brought up so many different things that were really stimulating. I could have talked to you for twice as long, 3 times as long. I liked how you talked about the simple majority versus the needs of the minority, consent through election, the question of can consent be withdrawn? I think that's something that is important to consider. You talked about how we've strayed from limited government and yet we have made progress in some areas. This was just really, really good. I particularly liked, as my colleague said, your discussion of culture, and not just the institutions of government, but how culture affects our political dialogue, our politics in general. Yeah, this was a great way to start the morning. You guys did very, very good. Very thought-provoking, very stimulating intellectually. And my only recommendation to you would be, when you do your opening speech, slow down a little bit and enunciate a little bit more. I was trying to write everything down and you were going so fast, I couldn't quite get all of it, but that's just a minor technical means of improvement. Overall, this was really fantastic.